little bit of technical difficulties. As Rachel said, I work at the University of Rhode Island and I've been there a long time. And most of that time I've been working in the biological control lab. I worked with Dick Casagrande until he retired about 4 years ago. And many of our projects are involving invasive species. And we may start with surveying for invasive species, and then, if applicable, we work with biological control. And some people approach us with invasive species issues and want to know, if there's a biocontrol solution. The lab opened about 27 years ago. And since then, as it said, it's been powered by many hardworking URI students. We're up to having as many as 10 or 11 students at a time in the course of a semester or the summer, helping us with our research. So we're here today to talk specifically about the emerald ash borer, which luckily is not this big. This is a very zoomed in picture. It has killed over 7.5 billion ash trees in the US. In Rhode Island, we don't really have many ash as our forest. Less than 2% of our trees are ash. For Newport, with public trees, it's less than 2% ash, and Providence has as many as 8% of their street trees are ash. This gives you a little better idea of about how big this insect is, and for all the damage it does, it's actually pretty tiny. They're in the family of insects that are called jewel beetles, and you can see why, because they're beautiful iridescent colors, and most of the beetles in the family are. There's a few drab brown ones, but most are pretty beautiful. This is a surprising thing to me, is that actually this is the larva and what does all the damage, and it's about twice the size of the adult, which is very strange. But when it undergoes complete metamorphosis and goes through a pupal stage and then an adult stage, this is the crazy difference. So on the right, you can see that larva, by the time it's done and exits from a hole in the tree, it's done all that serpentine gallery damage underneath the bark, and that's what ends up killing the tree. And also then you get this woodpecker damage, which is a really good sign to use to know if you have emerald ash borer in your tree, because the woodpeckers are going after the larvae in the tree, and so they'll peck large holes like some of the ones you see, but then also eventually with a lot of woodpecker damage, much of the outer bark comes off, and it's referred to as blonding. So it's turning the tree from its normal color to a whiter appearance. The emerald ash borer was first found in 2002 near Detroit, and this is a snapshot of how far it had moved in 2006. And then this is as of 2018. And I didn't really go get a more recent map, because 2018 is when we found it in Rhode Island. And we were the 35th state to find this insect. Connecticut and Massachusetts were quite a bit before us. And we were sort of stuck in the middle, luckily not having it, but pretty sure we were going to at some point. The important thing about 2018 and us being the 35th is that for some reason that was the trigger that the USDA used to stop regulating. Before that, every state that found emerald ash borer was added to the quarantine. And so, if you were within the quarantine, then various wood products couldn't leave the state. So at 35, after Rhode Island was added, it's no longer regulated now. And one of the things that they're doing now that we'll talk about in a minute is they're focusing more on biological control. So over the years where we knew we were likely to get emerald ash borer, but we hadn't yet, we were involved in monitoring for this insect and trying to make sure we found it when it came into the state. And so this is a solitary wasp. It's called Cerceris femapennis. And it's a solitary wasp that likes to collect jewel beetles, beetles in the family Puprestidae, to feed its young as they develop in nests in sandy ground. And it's kind of funny, this is a elementary school ball field, which is really a perfect example of where we did most of our surveying using this method. Because if you go to a ball field that's used by Little League or by any organization that plays frequent games and keeps their field in tip-top shape, then it's not in tip-top shape for this wasp. So having grass growing like this, and most of the sandy areas available to them is more what they're looking for. So here's a sorceress. You can see that the EAB is about the same size, but they carry them and they deposit them in one of the cells under the ground, and use it to feed their immatures. So our students have been doing this over the years, and it has to be one of the things they enjoy the most. You kind of mark out the holes, and you know where the nests are, and you wait for the female who is out foraging for beetles to bring back a beetle and go to drop it in. And instead, you grab her with a net, remove the beetle, and let her go again and let her collect again. And so it's kind of mean. You actually are stealing food from baby wasps, but generally there's a certain number you can kind of do and assume that they'll make up the difference. And so it has been set that there's about 50. If we get 50 beetles from a field, we can say if we didn't find any emerald ash borer, there probably aren't any in the immediate vicinity. So a side effect of this is that we were able to get some information on other members of the jewel beetle family, other buprestids, and many of them are tree pests. So one of the things we found, for example, is we had a lot of two-line chestnut borer that built up, after even though they're called a chestnut borer, they also feed on oaks. And with the gypsy moth infestation, all of our oaks, the ones that didn't die, were very heavily stressed. And so the stressed trees allowed the two-line chestnut borer to build up. And so that's something that we were able to see with this surveillance program. So we like the idea that it allows us to be monitoring native pests that might occasionally outbreak. And so I already mentioned two-line chestnut borer, but this also has bronze birch borer or the flat-headed wood borer. This data is actually from the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, who's doing the same information. So as I said, we detected emerald ash borer first in 2018, and our first find that we were aware of was using that biosurveillance. But the USDA had set up numerous traps throughout the state that year to find it in Rhode Island, and there were about 9 locations of those. Those are the purple prism traps that many of you probably saw throughout the state. It wasn't just in 2018. That was when they set up a large number, but for quite a few years beforehand, we'd had some of those sticky purple prism traps set up. And so these are the areas where we found them in 2018. And at the time, the general consensus was that we had probably had the insects in the state for a few years before. But I do think it's interesting that all of the finds were right around the borders of Connecticut, Massachusetts. So I don't think it had been in there very long. So these happen to be Newport photos, but I wanted to show you what the funnel traps look like that we use. And they're green because that's the color that the beetles respond to better. But there's also lures attached that bring them to the trap as if it was a tree. And of course, it's hanging next to a tree. And so this gets checked every 2 weeks, and the Newport Tree Conservancy helped us with this. And this student on the right is a summer intern for the program. And I'm trying to think what else I wanted to say about this. Just that we did this from 2018 through 2021, once we knew the beetle was here. And these are the 2021 results. The table is specifically Washington and Newport counties, but the map includes everything. So the larger blue dots show where we found larger numbers in our WASP biosurveillance monitoring, and the green circles are the larger green ones where we found more in our green funnel trapping. So again, I don't have the ones, I guess I don't have the green funnel traps in the northern part of the state. The northern part of the state is actually where we have most of the ash damage so far, and where we've been seeing some mortality. In Washington County, we have found them since 2018, but we still are finding them in very low numbers, which is nice. If you look at the table, you can see Wickaboxit in West Greenwich and Nicholas Farm. So Kent County has a little bit higher numbers. And then we have Exeter again is a little bit higher numbers, but what we're finding at Westerly, Similar Field is where we first found them with the surveillance trapping. And this year we still just trapped one. So part of that may be down to the number of trees that are in the area. So as I said, when a new pest comes in, the USDA, their first intention is to eradicate it if they can. If one insect gets in, it's called an interception, and they take care of it. If a small infestation is found, there's an attempt to eradicate. If they're not able to do that, then the next thing is they work really hard at what they call stopping the spread of a new pest. And that was attempted with the emerald ash borer, but was not very successful. And at the time that Rhode Island's infestation was found, by then a biological control program was well underway, funded by the USDA. And they have a new lab that they've set up in Michigan to do all this work with biological control. But at that point in 2018, their full focus went to biological control. So that is really the only program that they are funding for emerald ash borer anymore. And the goal is to protect young ash. And I said we don't have that many ash. It's a small percentage of our forest, but we do have some in our red maple forests. And so that's been our intention, is to find areas near the infestation and try to restore so that we can have those continue in our forests. So the program has released a total of 4 different parasitic wasps, but only 3 of them are appropriate for New England. And so we've been involved in releasing these 3 parasitoids. And emerald ash borer is pretty small. These guys are even smaller. The top one is an egg parasitoid, so it has to lay an egg inside an egg under the bark. And then Spatheus galeni and Tetrasticus, they have to, with their ovipositors, which are longer, go through the bark and find a larva to lay their eggs in. And this is just to kind of show you how some of it is done. There's an ash tree on the left with a log attached to it. We tie it up, and that log has come from the lab in Michigan where they've been rearing these larvae in the logs. And then they have parasites lay eggs in the larvae. So what we're getting are parasitized larvae with adults just about to emerge. And I can show you here. We have to watch for a little bit of time until the photographer zooms in a little bit, but this is the log, and this is on a warm day, and you can actually see that these tiny parasitic wasps have emerged, and so now they're able to go into the tree and parasitize emerald ash borer eggs. So we also do that some with Spatheus. They generally send us adults to release directly. With Obius, we have a tiny little pill bottle that has pupae in it, and the adults emerge from that. So there's various methods used based on what works best for each species. So I mentioned that the northern part of the state is actually where we think we have the highest population, and that's where we've been making more of the parasitoid releases. We have a total of 6 sites. 5 of them are in northern Rhode Island. We have 3 in Burrowville and 2 in Cumberland, and then 1 down in Hopkinton. And this graph shows you a little bit. The blue is one of the larval parasitoids. And so there's many, many more released. And there's an interesting side note to that, is that one year, I think it was 2020, it wasn't last year. In September, I guess they had an excess of parasitoids and asked if anyone was willing to release them. And I thought they would send me another small amount, similar to what we've been getting every other time that they sent them. And for some reason, maybe more people were off doing something else in September and said no, but I got maybe 5 to 10 times what we normally would have gotten. So I think that's why our Tetrasticus looks so high in 2020. So all 6 sites now have had the amount of parasitoids released that's recommended for one site. And so with our first site in Hopkinton, that happened after 2020. So in 2021, we were able to start looking for the parasitoids. So there's sort of two, it's a two-pronged approach to figuring out if this biological control is working. One is, did you get overwintering? Are they established? And then the other is, are they having any kind of an impact on the pest population? So the first one we're doing is we're trying to find that the parasitoids are still there. And so we found one of the three already and had it confirmed in 2021 from that Hopkinton site. And we have some others that are potentials that we just still have to go through the process of mailing them and getting them ID'd. But it was a pretty good start. And with the other 5, hopefully we'll be able to start monitoring for them next year. And maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to say that we're helping protect our ash. I'm sure you have some questions, so I guess we're going to be doing that at the end. But while I had an audience from Newport, I just wanted to mention to you that we have another pest, unfortunately, that we're concerned about. It's called the spotted lanternfly, and on the left is its wings at rest, and on the right is its wings opened up, which makes it look more like a moth or a butterfly or something. This insect was found in Pennsylvania first, and so it was just one of those tiny counties in Pennsylvania in 2014. And now here it is. All of the blue on that map are actual infestations present. So it has spread through Pennsylvania into quite a bit of New York. There's only one county in Massachusetts, but it seems to be a very large county. One county in Connecticut. And as of yet, you'll see a couple of red dots, if you could see close enough. But there are a couple of red dots in Rhode Island. Those are just individual finds of one spotted lanternfly. So we've been involved for maybe 3 years now in helping to monitor for this, and also to provide some outreach so that people know that it's something that we need to be concerned about. It isn't a moth and it's not a fly. It's called a lanternfly, which a lanternfly is a type of plant hopper. So it's in a particular family, which we don't have that many of here, but we certainly don't have them as large as this. You can see its proboscis there on its abdomen, and that's how it does its feeding on the phloem of host plants. And as it's taking in all that plant sap, it releases a lot right at the same time. So it's excreting the plant sap, which is called honeydew. And I said it was a large insect. There it is, 1 inch long. And that's a very large plant hopper. We have tiny little potato leaf hoppers and things like that you might be a little more familiar with, but this is a large plant hopper. And just a quick idea of its life cycle. Right now, we have overwintering eggs, and they remind me a lot of gypsy moth eggs. They can be laid on the tree trunks. This is probably most common on their preferred hosts, but they can also lay them on inanimate objects. So we do worry about them being moved on vehicles and RVs and lawn chairs and things like that. So we have to be careful about them. In May through June, July, you get the small immature nymphs. This is an incomplete metamorphosis type insect. So it doesn't have any kind of pupal stage. They get larger and larger nymphs until it becomes an adult. In July, you get those larger ones that turn red. August, you have adults, and September, they're mating and aggregating in large numbers, which is why they, in addition to being a plant pest, will be a bit of a nuisance pet. And then mating near October, oviposition, and then you get the overwintering. And the eggs, like I said, I'm definitely concerned about, transporting that way. I did go to Pennsylvania and take some, actually, no, this one's from Penn State. The other picture is mine, or the video is mine of the nymph. But this is how you can see that they can be in large numbers. This is in orchards. This is an Ann orchard. And that's the one I saw in a park down in Pennsylvania. And that's a 4th stage nymph. And they move very quickly. And they can aggregate in large numbers also. There's a smaller one, maybe a third. And here they're all in a big aggregation also. So, yeah, it's funny the way they're arranged on the plant there. They do have an impact on plants. So the only plants that are actually being killed down in Pennsylvania, since they've had them the longest, are vines in vineyards. Grapes are one of their preferred hosts. So their main preferred host is a plant from China, from Asia, just like this insect is from Asia. And it's the tree of heaven. It's an invasive. And so generally by the time they get to fourth instar, they'd like to be feeding on tree of heaven. But in the meantime, they can feed on black walnut and hops and grapes. And all of those, plus one or two others, they're able to complete all their development on, even if they never make it to tree of heaven. But when they're young nymphs, they can feed on up to 100 different types of plants. But they do seem to have a bit of a migration from host to host as they grow. And even when they get to be near adults, they'll move off of tree of heaven because it starts to senesce. And then you'll find them on maples and birch and other things. Honeydew builds up, and then you get sooty mold, which can block photosynthesis and be a mess. The honeydew also attracts wasps. So there's a few fun things to look for. We're doing what we can with the outreach, and we have a biocontrol website. You can just Google Biocontrol Lab, URI, and we have a link to the DEM report a sighting. If you go directly to DEM, they have their own spotted lanternfly page as well. We're trying to provide a lot of information, and we've gotten a lot of information from Penn State since they've been working on it for quite a few years. We're also doing some biocontrol with the USDA. So I'm happy to answer questions at the end, and you can find us if you want more information about all our other projects on Facebook, Instagram. Okay, I'm all set.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, so we're going to transition to Joe's part of the presentation.
Stop screen sharing here.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll switch gears from biocontrol to our horticulture lens. So Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, can everyone hear me and see my presentation?
You are sharing, we can see the Google screen right now. Yep, in your presentation. Thank you. And just a reminder to folks, in the chat window on your bottom right corner, you can click the icon, and if you want to type in a question for Lisa, I can gather those for her and Joe at the end.
All right. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you very much, Lisa, for that. That was fantastic and enlightening. Those spotted lanternflies are awfully creepy as they scurry around in that nymph stage, so something to keep an eye out for. I want to talk a little bit about the ash trees themselves and kind of the outlook they have going forward as a group of plants. So let's jump into it. So what do you picture, what do you think of when you picture an ash tree? For me, I didn't learn my trees until long after EAB had taken over in 2002. So I kind of learned of ash, kind of with the asterisk of, this is a kind of a doomed species. But, learning my trees in Rhode Island and living in Rhode Island, I became quite fond of ash trees. They were common in the landscape, used as a street tree or a yard tree, with beautiful fall color, yellows on especially the white ash species, more of a dark reddish purple on the green ashes, lovely furrowed bark, diamond-shaped furrowed bark, and not overly graceful, but old trees are quite lovely and for season interest. So I kind of, learned ash trees, as beautiful native trees, which they are. So EAB, I feel like a lot of people, who maybe don't pay too much attention to it, consider EAB kind of an old issue. It was discovered in 2002, and, a lot of devastation occurred in the early 2000s. So a lot of people, kind of thought, well, this pest has kind of run its course. But that is not the case, as we saw with in Lisa's presentation in Rhode Island. It took 2 decades for the pest to reach Newport, 15 years to reach Rhode Island, and another few years to reach Newport and Aquidneck Island from Michigan, where it was found. And like Lisa mentioned just now, we're seeing mortality in northern Rhode Island and western Rhode Island, Cumberland, Smithfield, Burrillville. So as of right now, East Bay ash populations, although they're not overly extensive, are unaffected. And that, with the discovery of the pest in Newport this year, that is subject to change in the future. So a little bit about ash, the species. Ash belong to the genus Fraxinus, of which there are 60 species, most occurring in temperate climates, Europe and Asia and North America primarily. Varying borer susceptibility. We'll talk a little bit more about this, and generally by varying, it's, extremely susceptible to highly susceptible. So most all species are very much affected by this particular pest. The 4 commonly planted species in the Northeast, but really more Rhode Island, green ash, which is probably the most common species used as a lawn or street tree. American or white ash, which is probably the most common in the wild in Rhode Island. Black ash, which is another eastern U.S. native, and then common or European ash, which is not as common, but is still seen in Rhode Island. And all 4 of these species are highly susceptible to the pest. Mountain ash is not an ash. It's a sorbus or a white bean. And some of you might be familiar with this particular plant, and it is not affected by EAB. So the identification of Fraxinus, the identification of ash trees, has never been as important as it is in Rhode Island as it has ever been. Actually, very easy tree to identify, and we'll take a look at some pictures. I know I listed these little bullets on your handout. I think it's important to mention that ash trees have opposite bud arrangement. And there's only a select few trees that have opposite bud arrangement that we grow here in the Northeast. And that is when, buds and leaves are arranged and placed opposite along the stem. And we'll take a look at pictures of that. And also ash trees have prominent U-shaped leaf scars. And a leaf scar is kind of an indentation where the petiole of the leaf, that's the part that attaches the leaf to the stem, has when the petiole is removed, the leaf scar is what remains, and those are quite distinct on differing species. The bark, diamond-shaped furrows, usually dark gray. I'm actually very fond of ash tree bark. The leaves are compound, 5 to 7 leaflets, sometimes 9 or even 11 on varying species. And the fruit is a winged samara that looks like a canoe paddle, not that much different from maple, but a little bit different. So these are the leaves, and you can see, this is green ash here with 7 leaflets. The leaflets are ovate, and usually you can see a prominent, the prominent midrib here, and also serrations as well. This is European ash with 9 leaflets. Sometimes it will have 11. So this is one leaf. So one leaf is made up of smaller leaflets. And okay, here is the the seeds, kind of like a canoe paddle or a cricket, what they use in cricket to smack the ball. I don't know what that's called. And the seeds will only appear on female trees. Ash trees are dioecious, which means that male and females are separate plants. So seed is only produced on female trees, but pretty distinct looking, a little bit like the helicopter samaras of a maple tree. So these are a closer look at the twigs, and you can see that the opposite bud arrangement. You can see how the buds are placed opposite along the stem. And these are what we call lateral buds or axillary buds, buds that occur along the twig as opposed to a terminal bud at the apex. But and you can see right here where my cursor is. This is the leaf scar, and it's kind of an off-colored indentation. And ash trees have prominent U-shaped leaf scars. And we'll take another look at that. And you can see in this photo here, this is a tree in my Antonelli Park, and you can see the opposite bud arrangement. You can see these little branchlets have emerged opposite each other on the branch, and that is it's very distinct with ash trees. And if you have a tree that is opposite bud arrangement with compound leaves, very likely, there's a couple of exceptions, not commonly cultivated, but very likely you are looking at an ash tree if it has opposite bud arrangement and compound leaves. Here's another look at the twig. You can see this is a good view of the leaf scar, U-shaped, off-colored. And you can see how at the nodes, or where the points of growth are, that the twig expands. You can see that here. That's also a good characteristic to identify ash. You can see these little dots. These are little lenticels or tree pores, allowing the exchange of gases and water. And those are usually common on the twigs. Triangle-shaped terminal, often. And like I mentioned before, the bark diamond furrows, usually a dark gray. And I'm very, very fond of ash bark. It's pretty unique. It stands out, and I think it's quite beautiful. And it's usually most visible on the bottom of the tree with the root flare, or where the roots, or where the stem of the tree or the trunk of the tree kind of transitions to roots and flares out. That's usually where this furrowing is most prevalent, especially on younger trees. And like Lisa mentioned, with blonding of trees, it's unfortunate, but the bark is kind of destroyed from the woodpeckers. So it's usually at the bottom of the trees that you can see the furrowing of the bark. So a little bit more. I know Lisa mentioned some ways to detect the infection of the pest. Usually there'll be exit holes present on in the bark, usually kind of like a half circle or U-shaped. Just because you see exit holes does not necessarily mean it's EAB. There's other insects that do similar things, so keep that in mind. This on the right is a tree that's probably in its first or second year of infection. And you can see that some of the major branches are starting to die back. So this would be a tree that's kind of in the early stages of infection from emerald ash borer. So as the pest kind of continues its way, a lot of times you'll see epicormic growth or witch's brooming, and that's when growth will emerge from the trunk of the tree in kind of this messy fashion. And you can see here it's kind of at the base of the tree, and this will happen as kind of the infection kind of takes over. And you can see extensive galleries in this photo as well here from the larva. And here is another tree on Ash Street that is kind of in the latter stages of infection. It's on its way out, unfortunately. So with kind of the impending destruction that is, going to come with the arrival of this insect to, Aquidneck Island and Newport, decisions have to be made, and kind of in the first steps on deciding how to preserve the species, we kind of have to calculate individual tree value. And this is also, a homeowner's first step or a business's first step in deciding, okay, these trees are at serious risk. We can either, and we'll talk more about this, we can either treat or we can remove at some point. And we have to determine if the tree has value to preserve. Because we can't, for many reasons, we can't treat every tree. So we have to, preserve the most valuable in the ash population. So this is done. It's kind of basic. It's kind of common sense in a lot of ways, but some of the determining factors, size and age, usually those go hand in hand. Usually the most valuable tree is a large tree, an older tree, but not too large or too old to where it's at the end of its lifespan. Obviously a tree that's in good condition. Unfortunately, EAB is not the only pest that affects ash trees. Ash dieback, a fungal disease, is extensive throughout Europe and is devastating European ashes over there, and also a number of other native pests and fungal diseases, and a whole assortment of pests and diseases that affect the species. So it's unfortunate. So just because an ash tree is doing poorly does not necessarily mean it is EAB. And that is something I have seen in Newport with some ash decline that I've observed. Location, is the tree in a good location? Is it, is seated in a poor location? Prominence, is it, the only, large tree on the street or in someone's yard? Personal fondness, obviously we have our personal attachment to trees, at least I hope we do. Environmental, things like stormwater collection and, shading and, kind of a micro environment that trees create, and, supporting of native insects and animals. And you can also calculate a tree in dollar value. I had to do it as a project back at URI. And if anyone's interested in this, I recommend you turn to the internet. It's very interesting. And usually a large size tree is quite valuable when calculated out. The cost of replacement as well, the cost to buy a new tree, and, kind of the time and effort it takes to steward a tree to maturity. Has also needs to be factored in when considering a tree's value. So usually, obviously, a tree of high value is one that we'd like to preserve, and that means treatment, and low value removal. So this is a tree in Newport that I would consider to be of high value. It's a healthy tree. It's a large tree. It's a very prominent tree, and there's no other trees obviously in this vicinity. It's an attractive specimen. It obviously shades the street and the house. So this is a tree that I would consider to be worthy of preservation and treatment. This is an ash tree, one of the biggest ash trees I've seen in Newport. And this is a tree I would probably consider to have low value. It has 4 or 5 codominant trunks, which, kind of splay outwards. The tree is very broad, and it's an old tree, and it's also in a state of decline. That I noticed, throughout the summer. So this is a tree that would be, extremely difficult to preserve, and also it's on its way out, and probably a tree that would not be worthy of preserving, unfortunately, although it is quite an impressive specimen. So if you determined a a tree to have a high value, then it would be worthy of treatment in many cases. And I think that homeowners and businesses and municipal horticultural institutions, cities, need to consider now on Aquidneck Island treatments for this upcoming spring in 2022. Because as of right now, EAB is not overly established. So obviously treating trees before the insect becomes established is crucial. The primary factor when it comes to treatment is cost, among other things, and the use of chemical pesticides is another large factor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The bigger tree, the more money it's going to cost you to treat, and the tree should be in good health, no detection of EAB. Spring and fall are the best times to treat. That's when the tree's vascular system is most active, so you'll have the most absorption of your treatment that you apply. So usually with a homeowner treatment, it comes in the form of a soil drench application, which you can see here on the right. Usually you would mix a chemical pesticide in solution and apply it at the base of the tree in the springtime for the tree to absorb the chemicals and essentially, have the vascular system be lethal to anything that would try and chew through it. And this is usually effective on trees 15 inches, maybe a little bit smaller than that. That's 15 inches is still a good sized tree. And treatment can be highly effective if done properly. So with proper use of the products and proper application, this can be highly effective in preserving ashes long term. Treatment for larger trees, you'll need to bring in tree care professionals and arborists, places like Stanley and Bartlett. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those institutions. And larger trees are treated with trunk injections. They kind of look like syringes. And these are some of the chemical pesticides that are used, the active ingredients of these pesticides, imidacloprid being probably the most common. And this generally costs about $8 to $12 per inch of DBH, and DBH is diameter at breast height. So if your tree is 10 inches in diameter, you're looking at about around $100 for a treatment, which is it's I'd say is pretty reasonable to preserve a nice tree. And down below, I have calculated this highly advanced and scholarly equation to help calculate cost. And this is also on your handout, but it's basically multiplying your DBH by multiplying the DBH by 10, which is roughly the amount of dollars per inch that you would have to treat, and then Y being the number of trees. Are you treating 3 trees? Are you treating 1 tree? And then obviously treatment is not a one-off. It is a repeated cost. So you would have to repeat in every 2 or 3 years. So you would have to multiply this by the number of years you would think you would treat, which as of right now kind of remains to be seen because we're not really sure how extensive the EAB will be and how it will play out. Obviously Lisa talking about biocontrols and ways to kind of keep the insect at bay. So we don't know exactly what the future holds. So we don't really know how long term these treatments will have to be. When I first saw this picture, I kind of thought it looked kind of like one of those Photoshop memes, but no, this is the real deal. I read the short article attached to it. It's a large tree on a private residence in Michigan, and it's apparently the largest ash tree in North America. And ArborJet has been successful in treating it for over a decade, and I believe it's 88. The DBH is 88 inches. So a lot of chemicals, unfortunately, to preserve this tree. And you can see a few of these products on the right: Triage and Imajet. And yes, these are non-selective chemical pesticides. So when these chemicals are injected into the tree and they're absorbed through the vascular system, they will, to some extent, have adverse effects to other organisms in association with the ash tree. So whether that be, caterpillars, certain Lepidoptera species, will also be adversely affected. So obviously that is not a good thing, and it kind of solidifies the idea, and that most people, arborists and horticulturists have, that we can't treat every tree, but valuable trees should be treated, and obviously this tree is a very valuable tree, so it deserves to be treated at the expense, in my opinion, at the expense of being the use of chemical pesticides. So if you determine that your tree is not very valuable, removal is probably the next step at some point. It's agreed that no immediate action in 2022 in Newport is needed, just because we're still not really sure how quickly the emerald ash borer is going to kind of take hold and reproduce. So it's not really something to consider for 2022, and obviously should be performed before the tree is in poor condition, because then the tree becomes a liability, and any tree that is a liability should be removed. And it's tough, as a tree lover, and I'm sure all of us here are tree lovers to some extent, to kind of come to grasp with the fact that cutting trees down isn't a bad thing, and I think we all kind of come to terms with that at some point, because trees, we want a healthy urban forest, and we want we don't want the urban forest to be a liability. So cutting trees down is okay, and especially in this case with emerald ash borer and the ash trees. Removal, I threw some numbers up there: $300 to $500 for smaller trees, $700 to $1,500 for larger trees. Again, a one-off cost. So this is a one and done, whereas treatment is a repeated cost. And again, these numbers are subject to be highly variable, because different companies, different situations. Looking into my crystal ball, I think that the price for ash removal will go up in Rhode Island, due to probably increased demand to remove the trees. What that means, I don't know, but I do think that the prices will probably go up as time goes on. So what are we looking at for resistance? So what you're looking at there on the left is Manchurian ash, Fraxinus manchurica, great name, native to Japan and parts of China. And this tree has shown resistance to devastating infection. But again, like a lot of things, there's variables. So how extensive is, EAB populations in a particular area? That, maybe the tree, if the tree was put into, the red zone in, Detroit, or in, someplace where the emerald ash borer is extremely established, would this tree have enough gusto to survive? And I think that's still a question that hasn't totally been answered, but it has shown forms of resistance, both in the landscape and also in research. It's similar in characteristics to European ash and black ash. It's got a nice habit to it. It's a nice yard or street tree. I believe it's quite cold hardy. And it's not overly commonly cultivated in the U.S., but we are seeing the tree used more. So recently, I did an interview for an article that was coming out on EAB and really all these, horrible things that are affecting our native trees: beech leaf disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, spotted lanternfly, um, and the person who I was talking with said that he heard, and I had heard this before, that 1 in 200 native ash trees are resistant to EAB. And I, of course, was skeptical of this. So I did a little research, and throughout the 2000s into the 2010s, millions and millions of ash trees were killed. But there were surviving trees in areas like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. There were surviving trees, and in a lot of cases, around 0.5% or 1 in 200 trees would survive. Now, what this looks like is this, the tree is in beautiful, vigorous, happy form, or is this a tree that's limping along? Kind of a mix of things, and not really clarified. But these trees were propagated and reproduced and used for experiments, controlled inoculations. And coming from my point of view, where I pay a lot of attention to the nursery industry and what trees are coming through and new introductions. The nursery industry has not released any new selections that have apparent resistance to EAB, and that right there told me that because I was thinking, if 1 in 200 native ashes are resistant to EAB, the nursery industry would have already selected trees. Now, I know the nursery industry does not work overly. The nursery industry is a slow process. Trees need to be selected, they need to be grown, they need to be trialed. It's not quick. But if 1 in 200 native ashes were resistant, that would be enough germplasm or enough, genetic, a large enough gene pool where selections could be made. So if it was finite, I think that we would see selections by now. So this is not so. This is, again, there's a lot of variability that comes into it. But is 1 in 200 native ash trees resistant to EAB? There might be some sort of quantifiable resistance there, but is it going to survive an attack? Is it going to, survive multiple years? That remains to be seen. So I don't really pay too much. I don't really, give into this all that much. And I think right now more work is being put into breeding in new genes like those of Fraxinus manchurica, which co-evolved with EAB. They're both Asiatic natives. So co-evolving together, resistance is going to kind of be built into the tree's genome, and that is what's being used to kind of develop resistant trees. And what that looks like still remains to be seen as of right now. But there is hope. There definitely is hope. And I do believe because of the numbers at which we've seen ashes, die, and there is definitely some germplasm or that genetic pool that something will arise, and I think resistance will be built in kind of through selection with our native ash trees. So I think that is something that the future holds, which is good. But again, there's still a lot of work to be done. So we will see. And that is it for me.
Thank you
this
so
is
much.
Rachel here slinging the rope up onto the ash tree so we can put the trap. We can hang the trap.
Snuck that one in on me, Joe. Thank you so much, Joe and Lisa, for your presentations. So again, if folks have questions, if you'd like to ask a question, You can put it in the chat window at the bottom. And while we kind of wait to see if folks have any questions for either of you, there were a couple that I actually thought of, so I'm going to throw them out here. One is, if a tree has an EAB infestation and it's cut down and removed by an arborist, is there a special way that material is handled by the arborist if it has that infestation?
I believe, like Lisa was saying, that the regulations aren't there's no. I don't believe there's any regulations on moving the material, but I believe that any good arborist would destroy the material. Got it. Probably burn it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that I thought of, I don't see anything in our chat window yet, is this Manchurian species that's co-evolved. Is there resistance based on chemical signaling that deters the pest from boring into the bark in the first place?
Yeah, I believe it's certain chemical compounds present within the cambium of the tree that resist feeding, essentially.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I just want to thank everyone for being here. We really appreciate your support for the trees in Newport, for ecosystems in general in Rhode Island and beyond. So thank you so much again, Joe and Lisa, and I hope everyone has a warm rest of your day. Oh, hang on, we have a question from David. Let's see, David's asking about the soil drench methods. What about effects of surface and subsurface runoff?
Yeah, good question. I think timing would be important there. I think with proper application, that the chemicals will be absorbed fairly quickly. So I think that as long as you applied slowly and let everything soak in, I don't think it would take very long for the chemicals to kind of start their ascent up the tree. So I don't think runoff would be a huge concern, but with proper application.
Thank you. Okay, any other last questions in the chat window? And Lisa, anything else that you'd like to say in closing?
Oh, I was just going to ask Joe, you were talking about burning. We've had a lot of trees taken down in our neighborhood. I'm very sad. We have a lot of pitch pine, and some of our newer neighbors seem to want them all to go away. Don't they chip everything now, or am I wrong that everything seems to go in a chipper?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that would take care of it if it chips it to pretty small pieces, right?
Yeah. That's true. Okay. That's true. Yes.
I'm curious about that because it seems like everybody, has that attached to their truck when they come around to take down a tree.
Oh yeah. You hear it all the time.
Yes, definitely in our neighborhood lately.
Chippers are fun. They're a lot of fun to use, just throwing things in there. I know that's kind of
says the living collections manager. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone again. It's 3:04, so we'll go ahead and end our presentation. I hope everyone has a good afternoon and rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa and Rachel, again.
Sure. Bye-bye.